Dr. Jazz.
Thanks so much, man, for taking the time. Appreciate it.
That was so nice meeting you, finally.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan.
Oh, come on.
In preparation, I have to admit that I didn't really prepare, but I have a lot of your recordings, and I'm a huge fan.
Seriously?
I was first intrigued by Eric Dolphy's
thank you.
music that you played for solo guitar. And
Yeah.
just today, in order to prepare a little bit, I listened to a recording of yours with Tony Malaby.
Oh, yeah. That's a
I
nice
guess
one.
2017, and
Yeah,
I really
yeah.
like it.
Oh, thank you.
I
Yeah, I love playing with Tony, man. I mean, it's like, oh, what a player. But yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks, man. Well, I've been a fan of yours too, so that's why I emailed you, so well, let me just...
Thank you so much. I appreciate very much to be part of this series.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to so many people, you've played with. I think I want to start this talk with The Day That Is, and the entire quartet is now done. I've talked with Mike, John, and Ingrid, and I think with half of the people from ICP and the new band, and like everyone. So I love doing these talks, just hearing how you guys do things. I mean, and
yeah,
it's a nice archive, actually. I hope like 30 years from now someone will be interested, like, shit, what did they do in 2023? So
yeah. So in other words, you have already spoken to all of the sources. I know that you have spoken to a couple of ICP members, but you have also spoken to Ingrid and John and Michael. Yeah. Is there like common themes like between those guys? Like you have a lot of knowledge now about how people think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, being a composer, it's always, I try to ask people about composing and just how they, approach some things, or, to get new ideas. I mean, that's what I wanted to start with you, like the Day That Is. I listened to it a lot, and it's so beautiful what you wrote, And
thank you so much. I have to admit that I'm proud of it. There's like various degrees of proudness. I mean, I'm proud about everything that I did in my creative life. It's part of my existence. But of course, some things turn out better than others. And that's, of course, highly subjective. Mm-hmm. I actually have had beautiful experiences with things that I thought were not so strong. And then I was sometimes surprised that it obviously was meaningful to listeners. So I have changed my tune a little bit in regard to what I consider to be successful or not successful. I just try my best.
Oh, sure.
Every time.
Yeah.
Every day to be a creative person. But indeed, The Day That Is a special recording for me, because of the circumstances and the beautiful friendship that I was able to experience during the making of this record. Because you could maybe say that The Day That Is was my pandemic project. As you will know, I live in New York and have been living in New York for the last 15 years. Yeah. And at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously, New York was, the epicenter of this crisis. And my wife and I, we are sort of in a lucky position. We have a nice apartment and a little bit of space, which is
that's good, yeah.
Not too common in New York. But at the end of the day, we spent months very isolated. There were no concerts, there were no gatherings. We were kept to our own devices.
Yeah.
And so the idea arose to write, a new book of music. And I was thinking about a couple of folks that I, wanted to play some music with. once there was an opportunity to play again. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and I wrote this music, and maybe 6 months into the process, I started to reach out to folks. It turned out, that there was still no concerts and nothing, but you could like meet and practice. And so I had this idea for this recording, and my friends, they agreed to it. I have had interactions with each one of the musicians before. So with John Hebert, I share history with playing in Angelica Sanchez's Nonet.
Oh, okay.
And he's literally one of my favorite musicians. I really love him as a player. And he has a very special vibe around him that just makes you very comfortable. So
one of the funniest guys, man, on the circuit, I think, really.
Yeah. He is really something else. Yeah. And then with Michael Sarin, I've been a long time fan of Michael Sarin. I grew up in Germany, and Germany, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, when I went to conservatory, had a very lively music scene. It still has, but at the time, it was still West Germany, so the scene was very, very lively. And Thomas Chapin came to Germany, and Cologne specifically, where I lived. He came there a lot with his trio. And it's one of my all-time favorite trios. I really loved it, and I loved the interplay. And so, I've been aware of Michael's playing for a really long time. And then a couple of years ago, we started teaching together in Maine at the Maine Jazz Camp. It's like a summer music camp. And I learned that he is not only a monster player, but also a monster guy. So I really wanted to do a project with him. And then Ingrid, of course, like me, is from Germany, living in New York. So, we have a lot of common ground. We share a lot of experiences. Yeah. And so she seemed to be a natural choice to make this a beautiful set. And so we rehearsed, and then we did the recording. And by the weirdest coincidence imaginable, this record was recorded on the day of the insurrection in Washington. So it's sort of weird coincidence that this thing was going on in Washington, like storming the Capitol. Yeah. And at the same time, we were in a studio in Queens, in New York, and trying to do something beautiful. So it was a very sort of special day.
Yeah, it's I wanted to ask you about the music. How did you write it? There are some really cool tunes like that. Caro Puck. I love that one. It has something, or the title track also so cool with that strange structure a little bit, or it seems like. How did you write? In general, how do you write music? What's your process there?
Yeah. Well, I have different sort of strategies depending on the different projects. So generally speaking, outside of the day that is, I employ sort of 4 different strategies. So I've been writing for a long time. I'm turning 58 on Sunday.
Oh wow!
So I have been at it for so about 50 years. I've been involved in music making, and I started writing tunes as a kid, really, and sort of the innocence and the naivete that I had as a kid, I sort of kept ever since. So I'm still to this day write songs in sort of the traditional sense of the word. Yeah. Really, melodies that I find interesting with chord structures, and the blowing is over the form in a traditional way, really. Not necessarily, 32 bars. There might be some odd amount of bars, or maybe some odd meter here and there. But basically, they're still songs. And then I have sort of a world of tunes that is sort of trying to bridge composition
Improv,
and
right?
improvisation.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah,
and it's trying to sort of navigate these universes and trying to disguise where composition stops and improvisation starts. This can come from like a lot of different sources, but like one thing that I employ a lot is symmetrical scales.
Okay.
I always been a fan of Olivier Messiaen and those symmetrical scales, and in one way or another I sort of employ those oftentimes. And then I have like a third category. Those are sort of graphic tunes, like with graphic notation. I have invented my own graphic notation. It's called Cookbook.
Oh.
And of course, every composer has, if you go into graphic notation, everybody has like their own language. And so in my case, sort of the starting point or building block is the idea of what I call instant memory. So I have like certain symbols, and then you improvise together on the basis of certain symbols and rules, but you memorize what you play in that particular moment.
Okay.
And then at a later stage, that memory is reintroduced into the playing.
That's a cool one.
So it's kind of almost like instant composing, instantly coming up with something as a collective. And memorize back, of course, these memories, and then recalling it back.
That's a cool one.
It's it's an old device, but I still like it very much. And then, of course, there's the world of completely improvised music. So I'm also, I have a lot of affection to that. In fact, I just did a recording with master trombonist Steve Swell.
Oh, really?
And we did like, it was completely, initially we were wondering, should we come up with some strategies, or should we, have some tunes? And in the end, we decided to sort of, do like total improvisation. And that turned out to be very successful.
Just do it.
And I would say I'm sort of equally, just do it.
Oh man, beautiful. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, it turned out to be really nice. I'm very proud of it. So I think these four universes, they are more or less equally represented in my music making. And I cannot really say that I prefer one over the other.
Sure.
So, in this regard, I'm not one of the English players or anything like that. I'm sort of very eclectic in this regard. And I've always been, much to the criticism of some critics, I've always been an eclecticist. I'm really interested in a lot of different music. I mean, a lot of my music involves improvisation one way or another. But I've just sort of looked into a lot of different territories of the universe. Now, at the same time, of course, for each project, I try to come up with a particular narrative that is unique to the project. So since you asked about the day that is, I would say for the most part, that is in territory 1 and 2 that I described. So there are either songs or pieces that, deal with, moving from one universe into the other universe, into the universe of improvisation. But I try to narrow down the narrative there, and that was basically involving the players. So these players are all insane virtuosos, not only as improvisers, but they are also really amazing readers of music. And so I try to be, I had some terrible disasters in my lifetime, either overriding or underwriting.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
So over time, I have, I'm more and more, I emphasize thinking regarding, you have to really know who you are dealing with. And you want to sort of present them in the most beautiful light imaginable, and sort of, cater to what they are really good at. So the members of that quartet, they are good at everything. So they are, this very narrow group of people, like, very New York in sort of like the classic sense of like what New York is or isn't. Like they really They really cover a very, very broad range of territory, and they are really good readers.
Yeah.
And they are very reliable. They are very reliable musicians. So they are incredibly good at taking information in and adding something on top of what you are asking them. So they are over delivering in a way. Like you come up with an idea and you hope that the idea is good. And then they take that idea and add their personality and their skill set. And in the end, it's much better than what you had imagined.
Exactly.
So they are, you know, part of that rare group of people. And so for them, I was thinking of a couple of ideas that I would not necessarily bring into other contexts. So it's maybe fair to say that the music is a little more complex than in some of my other projects.
Yeah.
And so that was, you know, essentially I felt like, oh, I have no, you know, there's no restrictions because these people will be able to do whatever I asked them to do. And you know, that was indeed the case. So we had only 4 rehearsals, and then you know, we recorded the whole record one day. So it was pretty cool.
Did you guys play live this music?
I'm not surprised, but I was still very, very impressed by you know, skill set of my friends.
Yeah, I mean they're you know, I remember the first time I recorded in New York, it was with Mark Elias, Tom Rainey, and Tony Malaby back in 2002 or 3, and it was the same. We did the whole record in Systems 2 in 2 hours, and it was not really easy music, but it was just like, okay, oh, okay, next. I was like, Jesus, that's how this goes, you know, like I was shocked. But yeah, I love that all these people can read the heaviest parts and then freely improvise, and that's like heaven, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then on top of it, you went to Systems 2, which is also on the engineer level. It's the same thing, right? You go into the studio and you can start after 10 minutes. You can do the first.
I think it was like putting my effects together, and Mike Marciano had everything ready. I was like, shit, really? That's okay.
Yeah, it's really a tragedy that that place is not there anymore.
That's such a shame, man.
It's really deeply missed.
Yeah, many places, closed in New York. I mean, all over in Europe as well lately. It's kind of, but yeah. But,
so that's the story behind the day that is.
Did you guys play this music live already?
No, we have not. No, we had a few requests from Europe.
Okay.
You know, to sort of present this, but there was never really you know, it was like just logistically I could not pull this off. Maybe it's gonna happen one day. Maybe after this interview, like some festival will like check this out, this interview.
Sure. Like always, right?
Get in touch.
No, it's a great record. It's really a great record. It's so modern, you know. It's like kind of what jazz now is in a sense, I think. And I love that there is no harmonic instrument. You know, it's a nice open, like kind of ornetish vibe, but like completely unornetish in a way, because it's, you know, the vibe is different. But I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah. You know, I tried to write relatively, I don't want to say densely, but I tried to take full advantage of the players and of the, you know, there's not necessarily a ton of unison lines. I mean, there's a few unison lines, but I definitely tried to make sure that I can, you know,
counterpoint and everything.
Use the quartet as an orchestra as good as I could.
Yeah, definitely. Mission accomplished, man.
So, thank you so much.
But
also for me, kind of sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's it.
No big deal. Go ahead, please.
No, I wanted to ask you, going back, like, you know, you grew up still when Germany was, you know, East and West, and
yes,
you mentioned Thomas Chapin, and like, but who were the players? Like, I guess we're talking about early or mid 80s in Germany that you got the first contact of regarding jazz and improvisation. I mean, were there particular concerts that you said like, shit, I want to do this stuff, or What was the trigger?
Yeah, there was definitely an evolution. So I was born in 65, and I grew up in the north of Germany, close to the Danish border, in a small city called Schleswig.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And my father, who is not a musician, but had an affinity to the music, to jazz, he was friendly with some musicians from Hamburg, the city of Hamburg, which is about like 100 miles, like 130 kilometers away from the city that I grew up in. And they would, so when I was 8, 9, 10, these musicians, they sometimes would play in the area. And so my parents, they would go to the concert and they would take me with them. And I was really intrigued. I really loved the music. And I was a kind of an odd child. I had a stutter. I was socially awkward. And so the music was speaking to me. And, I had this sort of like these fantasies of, also playing an instrument, maybe being on stage with these musicians. And so since my parents knew them, they were very approachable and they were very sweet. And in fact, I asked my parents, for Christmas to get me a trumpet. I was attracted to the trumpet maybe because I was such a nerdy kid. The trumpet was like, it's this like loud instrument and like you make yourself heard on a trumpet, something like this. Maybe that was the attraction. And so the first trumpet actually was kind of like a used trumpet that came from those musicians that my parents knew. And things sort of developed from there. So when I was a teenager, first of all, I have to say, growing up in the 70s in West Germany, there were like a lot of opportunities. There were like, you could hear a lot of jazz on the radio. Every day there were like jazz programs. And the city of Hamburg, which was, a little bit of a stretch for me as a kid or as a teenager, but I would like hitchhike to Hamburg, and they would have like record stores. And so, I would sort of, the money, I would sort of try to get money together for like one vinyl record. It would take me whatever, 2 months or so. And I would, investigate very carefully, what do I need first? Do I need the Shape of Jazz to come or Kind of Blue first? And, I had to sort of figure out how to do this, but I was really hooked. And the city of Hamburg was good in this regard. They had, and still have to this day, this beautiful radio station, the NDR. And they had a radio big band there. And that radio big band, I don't know about these days, but back then in the late 70s, they had a rehearsal band. So musicians from the orchestra, they would give advice to sort of young musicians.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, that's cool.
And I was maybe 13, 14 or so. And so I got the opportunity to get advice from them. And then also these were sort of the early days of like jazz music camps in Germany. So my parents were kind enough to sort of let me go there when I was maybe 14, 15. In fact, some of those, I just like this summer, I taught at the summer music camp of Remscheid, which, it's a jazz music camp. And that was one of those that I went to when I was a teenager. That's cool. So there's like this like beautiful cycle. And, people were like unbelievably supportive. And so I remember in those days, I studied with Achim Kaufmann, the Dutch flugelhorn player. And there were workshops with Kenny Wheeler, I remember.
Oh, wow, man.
I had the nerve to get in touch with Art Farmer, who lived in Vienna at the time, who was like beyond kind and, invited me to Vienna. And so I had a lot of encouragement. And, it seemed only be natural to, go along with all of this positive energy. Also, like very early on, I met a lot of my childhood or teenage friends are friends to this day. So I met Achim Kaufmann when I was like 14 or so. Frank Rotkowski, who is from Hamburg, so I met him around that time, 14, 15. My ICP colleague, Toby Delius, I met him around that time. So,
okay.
a lot of connections developed early on. And then, of course, when I was 18, I moved to Cologne to study at the conservatory there. At the time, that was the only conservatory in Germany that had jazz studies.
Oh, okay.
And I auditioned, and Manfred Schof took me in. Manfred Schof, the trumpet player,
sure.
and so I started with him. And at that time, Cologne was sort of the cultural center of the jazz world in Germany, and I continued living in Cologne for the next 25 years. So I studied there, and I stayed on, and it was a very healthy scene back then.
Yeah. Like, how did you then hook up? I mean, years ago when I kind of started digging into jazz, obviously I came upon ICP, the Instant Composers Pool Orchestra, and Schlippenbach's, the Berlin contemporary jazz things, and you were part of those really important European orchestras, like especially in modern avant-garde music, let's call it like that. But how did you become a member of those two really important bands? I mean, first Schlippenbach's, I guess this was the first one, right?
Yeah. To tell you the truth, it's astonishing to me too. I cannot really explain it in any rational way, and that is not just a means to be modest here. I think I have a little bit of a talent. I definitely have an enormous amount of dedication. I was always very dedicated to the music. But I think a large part of my career is really due to lucky circumstances, being sort of, born at a particular time under particular circumstances. And of course, all of these factors are maybe equally valuable, equally important. But luck definitely played an enormous role. So I first met Alex Schlippenbach in 1987. So I had finished my studies at a conservatory in Cologne, and I was very lucky because Manfred Schof took a liking in my playing, and he, in those years in the 80s, he was not only very much in demand as a trumpet player, but he was also writing a lot of music, mostly for TV and film. And so oftentimes he would be asked to do things and he couldn't do them. And I was just lucky enough that, at the tender age of 22, he decided that I was good enough to represent him. So the first things that I did with Schlippenbach in the orchestra, and also with the trio, with Evan and Paul.
Oh, really?
Those were,
oh, man.
Manfred. And so Manfred, he essentially introduced me to Alex, and he said, I cannot make it for this particular gig, but I have this young student. He just finished his studies, and I think, you should check them out. You should check him out. And my experience again was that, all of these people that I met at this young age, they were extraordinarily supportive. And I mean, I was obviously, a greenhorn. Maybe I showed a little bit of promise. But they took me in, and they were like incredibly sweet. And like we did all of these unbelievable things, like going to Japan and like doing all of these recordings. Like the first recording that I did with Schlippenbach was for ECM, and the trumpet section, believe it or not, was Benny Bailey, Kenny Wheeler, Henry Lauder, and myself.
Man,
and it was, it was just unbelievable. And I was maybe there was a certain degree of naivete maybe involved because I was so young. And I was also, I was definitely committed. It was not, I was obsessed with the whole thing. And I think people realized that.
Yeah.
And so they took me they took me in, and they were, so the thing, like one of the things that I learned from these people that was absolutely astounding for me. So because I grew up in Germany, and I grew up at a time, at a transitional time, I would say, because of my age. So there was definitely a transition from a more strict upbringing of a very rules-based environment in school and so on and so forth, that was to some degree part of my DNA. And then I came into these circles, and the energy there was totally different. Yeah. People were incredibly open-minded, and there was not a hierarchy. So you could sort of be, you could speak to Evan Parker or Willem Breuker or Kenny Wheeler or all those people in the band. And you were a greenhorn, but they wouldn't treat you as a greenhorn. They would treat you as an equal. And I mean, there was no doubt that, they were there and I was here. But they never, I mean, they sort of, it was just easy to feel at home. And it was just easy to feel part of this. And, it helped me to gain confidence and try to be better and, sort of follow their model, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another, really. So I was involved in this band, and at the time, because it was still West Berlin then, that was before the fall of the wall, there was a fair amount of financial support for the arts for West Berlin, because West Berlin was this sort of island in the middle of nowhere. And so West Germany, there was a narrative in West Germany anyway. So after Second World War, when the new West German constitution was written, it was written in such a way that it was made crystal clear that there was enough support for the arts, so that you would have, in the public space, you would always have like a really broad diversity of voices. Because of the Nazi regime, you wanted to sort of avoid that anything like this ever, had the potential to happen again. So you wanted to have a very broad narrative. And as a consequence, there was, money allocated also for fringe art, for things that are not sort of commercially successful. Obviously, this narrative has changed now. So that changed after the fall of the wall. It changed. Germany is still a great place, but it's not like it used to in the 70s and 80s. In fact, for me, oftentimes when people ask me, I say something along the lines of, I experienced sort of like the tail end of like the golden age, so to speak, because there was all of this support. And so as a consequence, the Alex Orchestra, the Berlin Contemporary Orchestra, and also Globe Unity, I was also briefly a Globe Unity at the time, got like a fair amount of support, financial support. And part of that support was also giving away, asking composers to write pieces and pay them to write pieces. And of course, Alex and Misha Mengelberg, they had been friends for, since birth, so to speak. Like they had been like very long friends. There was a very long, deep friendship there. And naturally, Alex asked Misha to come to the orchestra as a guest and write a piece for the orchestra. And for some weird circumstance, I was chosen. So Misha had written this like big piece, and there was this big trumpet part, it was almost like a trumpet feature. And I was chosen to play that part. And Misha liked what he heard, and this piece is actually part of that first ECM record that we did.
Okay.
And then so at that time, so that was the late 80s. Misha took me aside and he said, you know, I think you might be a nice addition to the ICP,
Oh, wow.
but I
Man,
have
okay.
no slot available at the moment. But you will get a call one day, and you can count on it. And you know, I was very flattered, of course, because this was Misha Mengelberg and one of the gods of European jazz.
Yeah.
And so it was fantastic. But you know, I didn't really give it much attention, and I just continued doing my stuff. But then, indeed, maybe 2 or 3 years later, the violin player that played with ICP at the time, Martje ten Hoorn, she decided for personal reasons to quit the orchestra. And so Misha decided that he would designate the violin parts to the trumpet. And so he asked me if I would join the orchestra playing violin parts. And I said, sure, no problem. I'm happy to do that. And so that actually, by a weird coincidence, we speak today, but I just had my 30th anniversary. It was on September 14th, 1990.
That's amazing.
That I had my first concert. And, at the time we were actually an octet. And Ernst Weishager was in the band.
Exactly.
So the lineup was a little different than it is today. But I became a member. I'm the German in the band. And you can tell that I am the German mentality-wise. But yeah, I've been a member ever since, and I consider it to be probably like the greatest honor of my life to be a member of the band.
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of the most long-standing free improvised orchestras in Europe. I mean, in the world, actually. I mean,
yeah. I'm not even sure if there's like any other band that has such a legacy.
I mean, I know,
and of course, we are not just improvising.
Yeah. I mean, I know in Italy there's the Italian Instabile Orchestra, but and of course you had like Schlippenbach's orchestras and stuff. But I think the ICP is like really the longest. It's incredible, and the heritage and the players in this band. Like if you look who played in that group, it's like what
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, beautiful, man.
And also very, very interesting. For me, if I might add this. Joining the ICP required a long learning curve because the orchestra, like, if you want to compare it, let's say, to Schlippenbach's organization, it's like organized very, very differently. And you have to essentially learn through osmosis, like you learn very slowly, like nobody tells you anything. But for me, it was quite a bit of a challenge because most everybody, or besides me, probably everybody in the band had been part of the Dutch/Amsterdam scene.
Yeah.
For years, sometimes decades. I think our boss, he is from Eindhoven, so I'm not sure if he was part of the Amsterdam scene, but he was definitely part of the Dutch scene before he joined. But everybody else was part of the Amsterdam scene. And I think, when people joined the band, they had a sense of what Han and Misha would be doing and what the narrative is. So for me, it was really like jumping into cold water. And again, everybody was incredibly gentle and patient with me. But I think it took me, I want to say, a couple of years before I sort of understood really like what the narrative is and the do's and don'ts, because it's not a free for all at all. I mean, on the surface, it might look pretty wild, but it's actually at the same time, and it is wild on some level, but on another level, it is also incredibly precise.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And, it's like comedy or something, like where like it looks like incredibly loose, but in fact, it is like everything is like crazy strategic. And so ICP is like that too. So and I had to learn that, and it was very interesting because, I'm obviously German by nature, and maybe a little more sort of a person in a box, and the Dutch narrative is really the Dutch mentality. way looser and playful. And so for me, it was also great. It was also from, like, you know, growing as a personality. It was absolutely fun, or still is fantastic to be part of this band, because I could sort of, overcome of maybe some, you know, tendencies of like growing up in this, like, you know, Northern German Calvinistic environment. It's great to be part of that organization.
Are you guys still, speaking of ICP, planning something for next year, or like for the upcoming months, like a tour or a new project? Or
yeah, we have I wouldn't call it a tour, but we have in late October we have a couple of concerts in the Netherlands. I will actually fly over. It's like the last weekend of October. We play in Amsterdam and I think in Haarlem. Not the New York Harlem.
I love Haarlem, man, in Holland. That's such a beautiful town. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, and a couple of other places. And then for next year we have a few things planned. I think, generally speaking, you know, because the orchestra has been such a consistent entity in my life. I mean, for decades now, we have played, you know, anything between 30 to 50 concerts each year. It definitely, you know, it's like changing now. Like during the pandemic, obviously, we didn't do a lot, and it's definitely slower. So it has to be seen, you know, what is in the cards for the future. But yes, so far, you know, we are still there, and we still intend to do some damage.
Exactly. I love that. But you mentioned not Haarlem in New York, but in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
What was the trigger of you to moving to New York? I mean, because since you played, like, you know, in the ICP, and you played with Schlippenbach, and obviously in all around Europe, what was the main reason?
Yeah, the main reason is really love.
Okay.
Love for my wife. So I first came to the US in '89. The first tour that I did was with a German bass player, Dieter Manderscheid. I had this project with Dieter Manderscheid. Initially we did the music of Jelly Roll Morton.
Wow, beautiful.
The New Orleans composer, and at the time we did this record and we won the German Record Award, and that led to a very beautiful couple of years where the German State Department, or a branch of the State Department, the Goethe Institute, they sent us around the world to perform this music. And so, among other things, they sent us to New York. That was the very first time I went there, which was absolutely fantastic. You know, it was sort of the good old days of like the original Knitting Factory. And I recall actually my very first New York experience. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate cliche, but I was checking in the hotel, my very first hour or hour two maybe after coming from the airport. I was checking into the hotel. It was the Washington Square Hotel. I still remember today, 35 years ago. And in front of me were Bobby Bradford and John Carter at the check-in.
Oh, come on.
And you know, that was like the time of the John Carter Octet, and I was, of course, a huge fan, Castles of Ghana and so on and so forth. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was, you know, getting out of the taxi, and then these people were in front of me. And I recall that actually, so that was when Don Preston was in the band. Mm-hmm. And immediately when he saw my trumpet case, Don Preston started a conversation with me. Oh, and wow. I thought like, oh my, it's really like, this is like the ultimate cliche, and like the gods have aligned to sort of give me this kind of experience. So, you know, I can share it with you now, 35 years later. And so, you know, I had these like really amazing experiences, and it was fantastic. But then at the same time, I never considered moving there. Mm-hmm. Unlike, you know, some of my other colleagues and friends. I mean, at the time, Gunther Hampel had already been there. Karl Berger had been there for many years, but I never I was kind of a spoiled little boy. I was traveling for the Goethe Institute, and things were taken care for, and I had a really wonderful life in Germany. There were opportunities. Like you said, I had Schlippenbach, I had Misha, I had other people. So I was really involved in the scene. And so there never seemed to be a need to move to the US, really. And so then at some point I started to come a little more regularly, and that was mostly due to ICP, really, because ICP, we had this beautiful situation. We were in demand around the world, and I mean, I have never counted, but I think I played maybe in 50 different countries with ICP all around the world. And so we started touring the US on a regular basis. There was an interest in ICP for a lot of years. And then in 2002, we won the Downbeat Critics and Badge Ensemble category. And that sort of, generated some sort of additional interest, I think. And so we started touring a lot. And I still didn't really consider moving there. It was just great to go to the US on a regular basis and do concerts and feel good about yourself, really, and make these connections. But then in 2005, I met my future wife, and my now wife, for the last 12 years, is a New Yorker. She was born in New York, and she actually has a connection to the music. She, in an earlier life, in the 90s, she lived in Europe, and among other things, she worked for BW Haas, the Willem Breuker label in Amsterdam. And so, she had an affinity, or has an affinity, to the music. And in 2005, she had moved back to the US. In 2005, she was visiting the Netherlands again. And just by coincidence, ICP had a couple of concerts at the time. And she attended one of the concerts, and we met there, and we fell in love. And we had sort of this long distance relationship for some time, for about 2 or 3 years. At the time, she had a job where she had to come to Europe every 6 weeks or so for a couple of days. So it was actually quite convenient.
Yeah.
But then, after a couple of years, you get a little tired of this. And we were trying to figure out, what to do next. And she was actually considering to move to Berlin. That was one of the ideas. We were fooling around with that idea. But ultimately, I thought, it's probably a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and let's just see how it goes.
Yeah.
Why don't I try this? And then in 2008, I moved here, and I've never regretted it. So,
well, sure, man. Who are the first people you hooked
I have
up
a great life, and I have a great life in New York City.
Who were the first people, Thomas, you hooked up with in New York? I mean, obviously, you're playing now with so many incredible players and collectives.
Yeah.
But
let me think. That's not even so easy to recall. I recall that in the early days, so first of all, because I had been to the US so often, that had sort of advantages and disadvantages. So people were used to see me. So I want to say for the first 5 years or so, people just thought that I would be visiting. So, they didn't really take me serious, so to speak. They were probably happy to see me, but they would not really think of hey, why don't I ask Thomas to be part of a project or something like that. It took quite some time before people were aware that I was a New Yorker. But in the early stages, I remember it was, in a way, it was sort of twofold. So I would meet new people, or people that I only knew kind of, not that I was not too familiar with. People like Mark Elias, Butch Morris, Carl Berger. So in the 90s, I had taught in Frankfurt at the conservatory, and Carl Berger was actually was the head of the jazz department.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when I first came to New York, Carl was a big part of my early reality, and I played in his improvisers orchestra for, I don't know, 10 years or so,
wow.
for
Okay.
really long. He's like, we had like a regular Monday gig at the Stone, at the original Stone on
wow.
Avenue C for
Really?
like every Monday. And of course, there's like these larger organizations. Also with Butch, I did that a lot.
Really?
These larger organizations, they were really like pools of players. It would also not necessarily always be the same group of players. So one week you would play with whatever. My colleague would be Herb Robertson in the trumpet section, and then the next week it would be Ralph Alessi or something. It would constantly change, but it also allowed me to sort of like meet everybody in kind of an informal way.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And then of course, I knew people knew me from ICP, so that was very good. I remember that I started doing sessions with Joe Fonda and Lou Grassi relatively early on. And initially, nothing much. I mean, we were just doing sessions, like private sessions, not even sort of concerts. And the private session thing is quite common here. Everybody plays with everybody else, and you meet people, exchange ideas, and try a few new tunes. And then a lot of these things, they are really kind of like long-term. So in the case of Joe Fonda now these days is one of my sort of closest buddies, closest friends. We have done a lot of different projects over the years. But, because of tragedy, I had sort of an entry into that world, not just as a occasional partner, but as a member of the band. And that was when the new band's Roy Campbell passed away in 2014. New band, and so at the time, the new band had a tour scheduled in Europe, like 20 gigs or so, and it was like 3 weeks before the tour or so. And so the remaining members, they asked me if I could do the tour. And so I did, and it worked out fine. I obviously fit into the band. I have been a member ever since.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we have been doing like 6 times or so. I've done 4 recordings. So, it developed like this. So really sort of slowly by slowly. And again, I think the difference for me was I was already 43 when I moved here. So, I had a little bit of a reputation already. So I think that made it a little easier for me to enter into the scene.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love the new band. Like, by the way, the last edition with Kenny on guitar. It's
wonderful.
I mean, I spoke to Kenny, like we did this talk a couple of months ago, and it's so different, because it's a harmonic instrument, yet Kenny plays it like he plays it, like not full chords, it's like intervallic approach, but it's such a different vibe. It's like, oof, so beautiful, man.
Oh, nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, in fact, it was quite a transition. It took us some time to figure out how to successfully integrate the guitar, not because, Kenny is a genius player, of course, but there had been so much history and such a strong narrative of what the band was. And that was really, really strongly defined by Mark Whitecage playing. And so when he was not there anymore, we had really to come up with like a new narrative. And it took quite some time. I'm glad that you think that it is a successful transition.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's Lou and Joe, and basically you are kind of continued. There's always like the nucleus of the band remains, even if, Roy passed away and Mark passed away. It's like still like, and I think that keeps it going, even if a new spice is added, or I mean, a new musician, then it's still like the same soup. I'll put it like that. I like it. It's
Great,
But
thank you, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
but Thomas, I wanted to ask you also about your solo trumpet playing, and you know, you're like one of the monsters of solo trumpet. When I listen to you, it's like you and I don't know, Peter Evans, and just like when did you decide to do solo trumpet, and what's the story behind there to investigate that area of playing?
Yeah, so that had a really long evolution. I think I did my first solo trumpet concert in 1986.
Already, wow.
So a really long time ago. And I think that was in large part inspired by Thomas Stanko playing solo trumpet concerts. There's only, as far as I know, there's actually 2 records, and I don't even think that they represent his solo playing all that well. But I have been Thomas Stanko's language is an important building block for me. He's one of my heroes, and I was lucky enough to work with him in David Murray's big band in the 90s. So I also was lucky to get him have a personal relationship with him. And so he did these solo recordings. And then I also recall there was a recording by Keita Carroll, the spoken word on head art. Yeah. And then Vadada's solo recordings from the days when he was not Vadada yet, when he was just Leo Smith on his own label. So I definitely had there was a certain narrative already there that I found intriguing, and I tried to, add to the language in, probably like a really naive way. But I didn't start to document things before the late 80s. And in the late 80s, I actually had sort of shifted I should not forget to mention Toshinori Kondo here, because he also did some really remarkable solo.
Monster, yeah.
In the 70s, in the late 70s. I had, as a teenager, just to add this, I didn't have a solo. I had a duo. It's actually amazing. So in my little hometown of Schleswig, 30,000 inhabitants, there was a record store. And they must have had an amazing curator, because there was only like a relatively small box of like jazz records. And I didn't have the money to buy them all, but the shop, you could listen to records. And sometimes I would just listen to the records just to sort of improve my knowledge. And they had, weirdly enough, in my small little town, they had a solo record, a duo record of Paul Lovin's own label, Pro Torch, called The Last Supper, Toshinori Kondo and Paul Lovins.
Okay.
So I was maybe 14 or 15, and the music was definitely totally over my head. And I recall not really liking it. But I was 14 or 15, so I was definitely exposed to sort of this type of language. And of course, at that time, that was radical music. I mean, what Kondo was doing on the trumpet was that was not only an innovation, but it was an innovation like, I'm talking about like 1980 now. It was like innovation at the time. So it was really cutting edge, so to speak. So, I had this really strong affinity to all of these languages, or I didn't really like it, but I was intrigued enough to check it out. And then over time, my aesthetic interest broadened, and I could integrate these languages better. I mean, I don't have to tell you, we always talk about, some of these developments sometimes take decades, right?
Sure.
Like it's a really long process. It's not that you pick something up and then it's becoming part of your language. So it took a really long time. So in the late 80s, I like the narrative changed a little bit, and I started experimenting with like sequencers and maybe like the music of the time. So like the first solo that I did was for a label that was operating out of Wuppertal, ITM, by the impresario Uli Blobel, who still plays sort of a significant role to this day in the sort of music scene in Berlin as a curator. And that was sort of electronics with trumpet. And that was less about, you know, extended techniques or anything like that. It was more about grooves and then trumpet on top. And so I continue, like for the next couple of solo records, I continued this kind of narrative, particularly when I was lucky enough, for a couple of years, I worked with a wonderful choreographer from Wuppertal, Pina Bausch. She asked me to write some music for her choreographies. And of course, you know, this was like for dance productions. So it was, a lot of it was about, you know, having a pulse of some sort. So, you know, I would program these like backgrounds, you know, sequencer stuff, and then play the trumpet on top. And so the work that I did for her is documented on 2 CDs. And it took quite some time before I think the first just solo trumpet was not before 2007.
Okay.
So that was quite some time. Then in 2010, I did a solo, and I'm quite proud about that. At that time, I had really gotten interested in the idea of circular breathing on the trumpet. And, you know, I was thinking, you know, it's kind of unusual to do circular breathing on the trumpet. Not many people do this. Of course, there's exceptions. Clark Terry had done it already, you know, in the 70s. And then, of course, Hannibal Marvin Peterson is like the master of circular breathing, but it had not really been explored all this much. And when it was explored, and I'm not talking about Clark Terry or Hannibal really, because they did amazing things with circular breathing, but it had always been like a little bit gimmicky, maybe.
Yeah, different music, yeah.
So, yeah. So I was thinking, why don't I do a solo record, a solo trumpet record? No electronics, no effects, no sequences, just like the trumpet. And I will try to sort of really push myself, and I will record music for solo trumpet, and everything will be circular. Everybody will be circular breast. Is that the proper English here? So each tune, you know, a tune might be 5-6 minutes long, and there would be a continuous flow of ideas. That was like the premise. And I was lucky enough to get the label No Business to.
Oh yeah, from that's one, the record one. Yeah,
exactly. So so that was really cool. And then, you know, again, a long time has passed, and just recently, in fact, just in August, under sort of tragic circumstances, because my friend Tristan Hosinger passed away, one of my colleagues in ICP, I decided to do another solo record in his honor.
Really?
And it was just released on Bandcamp. And I consider this to be probably my most successful solo record now, because I think I have, in recent years, I have sort of broadened my vocabulary, and particularly like certain aspects of playing that, you know, I mentioned Kondo earlier, that come out of Kondo's language, that are extremely violent and extremely crushing for a trumpet player. I have sort of learned to incorporate that language more within my other stuff. I used to do like a little bit of it, but as a trumpet player, and maybe as a German trumpet player particularly, there's always on the one hand, as an improviser, you want to let loose and you want to express something in the moment, and you don't want to be restricted by technical difficulties or constraints. But then at the same time, as a trumpet player, you are unbelievably vulnerable because the trumpet player's lip is a sissy. And there are no trumpet players that are not vulnerable. I mean, I think it's like one of the beauties of being a trumpet player, and also to, liking a trumpet player, is that every trumpet player in the world is a fragile being. And there's always a danger that you hurt yourself, that, nothing works. Like the best trumpet players in the world, you might see a concert and they are not, on top of things, because maybe the night before they played too hard and they didn't have a chance to recover. So it's like this constant battle. And so some of these techniques, I have been, because I think very strategically about my playing. So when I improvise, I let loose, and sort of like another side of my being. But then another side of me is very, I practice every day, and I have I try to be very, just like a good artist. I don't try to wing it. I try to sort of, do my exercises, go to the gym, this, that, the other. And then when you improvise, sort of you let loose and you allow yourself to get carried away. But then as a trumpet player, you are also, if you play a concert or you're doing recording, you also have to be smart about applying yourself, because I cannot go over the top when I have maybe 15 more tracks to record that day. So I have to be smart about things. So certain techniques I have been somewhat reluctant to present or to allow myself to integrate into my playing. And so on this latest recording, The Other Side of the Spoon, by the way, is the name, a quote from one of Tristan's poems. I allow myself to sort of go overboard, and I think it's my best recording yet. Maybe it's, also his spirit. Yeah. Because, we were close friends, but like anybody that has ever seen us together will sort of immediately understand that we were very different beings. But maybe his spirit and sort of his inner freedom inspired me to sort of.
It's available on Bandcamp already, or?
Yes, on Bandcamp. It was released maybe.
I have to check it out. Okay, I didn't know. Wow, fantastic, beautiful. Good that I asked you about the solo trumpet playing then. So.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful, man, super. Yeah, I have to check it out.
Otherwise, thank you so much. That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I love solo trumpet. It's like you said, it's such a vulnerable, sincere thing, and that's why it's so amazing to hear solo trumpet. For me, it's always like, and it's a single lines basically.
You feel with the players, you hope they will make it.
Man,
it's so.
Yeah, it's like, you play a solo gig for harmonic instruments. It's easy, kind of. Even for me, like when I play a solo concert, I'm like, shit. And I have like a lot of notes that I can play at the same time.
But it's a very special thing for like, even somebody like Peter, who I think is the greatest solo player in the world. He is, and he told me many times that he is very strategic. So, for instance, because he's such a master on the piccolo. Yeah. Like when he does a solo concert, he is very strategic because the piccolo is even more crazy than the regular trumpet. So he starts on the regular trumpet. The other way around. He starts on the piccolo and then he moves to the regular trumpet. So he's very sort of deliberate. Even somebody, of like, I think of him as really, he has unlimited he has an unlimited skill set, or so it seems to me.
Yeah.
But even he is very sort of strategic about, you know, how he's doing things. It's also not that he can, simply because he's like the most talented of us all, he can simply walk up and do whatever he wants. For him, it's also a very deliberate process of how he applies it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, it's just, yeah, beautiful. I'll check it out. I'm looking forward, actually. Tomorrow, I think it's going to be
Great,
quite
man.
late, but yeah. Thomas, what is otherwise for you on the schedule still for this year and for the upcoming months and weeks? I mean, do you have some, you mentioned the ICP end of October, but like, what's on the schedule for you?
Yeah.
Like, or some albums or records or tours or?
Yeah, so most of my focus now is already in 2024. So I was lucky enough, so an ensemble that is really dear to my heart and has become very dear, particularly during the pandemic, is a group, the name is Remedy. It's a trio with a drummer that used to live in New York for many years and now lives in Berlin. His name is Joe Hartenstein.
Oh yeah, sure, okay.
And the third member of the trio is Joe Fonda on bass. And we have released 2 records on FSR, the beautiful label out of Poland. And in fact, our second record was just released September 11th, I think. We are very proud of it, and we want to promote it in Europe. We actually have already done a third record this year. It has not been released yet, but so we have kind of a nice, there's a lot of material. We have never been to Europe as a trio, so we have cooked up a tour. And so we will go in April.
Fantastic.
And so I'm looking very much forward to this, to present this music and, present the music of those records. So that has been a very strong focus.
Fantastic.
Just this morning, I was talking to the 2 Joes, because we were also, in conjunction with the tour and hooking up the tour. We are applying for some funding from a German music foundation, a little tour grant. And so we were just like today, so it's very present in my mind right now because just this morning we were talking about this tour. So that is like something that is really, something that I really want to promote because I really like the band. It's a very interesting band. It has, I think it's equally, it has like pieces by everybody involved, and like the different our different languages, they add up really beautifully. So I think it's a very unique band. It's a very strong band sound, but also the material comes because we all come like from different territories, and it's always very, very interesting. Really looking forward to that.
Oh, fantastic.
And then, of course, as I said, ICP continues. I have these like gigs on a regular basis in New York City. Like one thing that I do on a regular basis that I like is the trio with Ken Filiano and Phil Haynes.
Oh yeah, you did the record, right? Didn't you do a record? I think Spontaneous.
Right. We have a band release, and it's a very nice project. I've been friendly with Ken for the last maybe at least 10 years. We played a lot of duo. We did a beautiful trio record with Achim Kaufmann in 2015, which is really, I think I'm really proud of this. Also, it has a sensational cover. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to covers. I was very intrigued by your Clean Feet records.
Oh, yeah, I love the covers on those.
I absolutely love the Clean Feet cover design.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
Travasos is a genius, really. I'm really a huge fan. So we do this trio. We have something coming up in Rochester and it's actually quite beautiful. It is for the trumpet player Paul Smoker, who passed away a couple of years ago.
And
He was
Phil
from
played a
Manchester.
lot with him. Yeah, sure.
Right, exactly. So there's a festival in honor of Paul Smoker,
Beautiful.
and so there, and so it's also nice for me because there are all of these like beautiful connections. So Paul Smoker, I recall listening to Mississippi River Rat when I was like 20 or so. I had to, Phil as a young man. So now we play in a trio, like in the same lineup, or same instrumentation as the Paul Smoker trio, and play with Phil. So there's sort of like this legacy, and Paul was also somebody that I could really get behind, so to speak, because he was one of the first, maybe outside of Lester Bowie, that tried to really play the whole history of jazz. And so for Paul, Big Spider would be as important as Don Cherry or something like this. So so it's really great to be involved with these guys and continue like some kind of a legacy.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, beautiful, man. Yeah, I hope to catch you in Europe next year or soon. I mean, we grab a beer together.
Yes, well, that would be wonderful. Yeah, man. I mean, I definitely hope that I can come back to Slovenia one of these days. I think it has been quite some time. I recall that we have been in Ljubljana with ICP.
And maybe Cerkno,
and I think
probably
there's even a
Cerkno.
live. Yeah. So yeah, I hope, man, that we can play.
Oh man, I would love to play
That
one
would be
day.
wonderful.
We have to play. Shit, it's like, yeah, hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah, let me know when you're in Europe. Maybe we can hook up something. So if you have some
That
free
sounds
dates
great.
or something. So cool. But Thomas, man, thanks so much for sharing the stories and some of this stuff. So beautiful. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very proud to be part of the series. I mean, you are inviting the greatest players in the world, and to be considered to be among those people is a really big honor.
I'm happy you guys say yes, everyone, to chat for 1 hour. So it's like, but yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it. But